So earlier this fall, we worked with a group called Wilder Research to study and report on HOA board members and property managers, as well as some residents, their understanding of stormwater practices and their maintenance requirements, as well as to determine what resources are needed to help these leaders better understand those things. And that included a survey and focus group. I don't know if any of you were involved in any of that process, but we talked to a number of HOAs kind of in the area and across the metro. The key findings were a lack of engagement and understanding around stormwater management in HOAs, financial concerns, and a desire for brief, digestible communications materials. If you're interested in more of the research, the full report is on the mnwcd.org/HOA stormwater tools. That should be in your packet as well. That's where all the resources we've put together are, so that'll be a good place to go for more information after this. So the content I'm going to share on stormwater management is somewhat a compilation of the 3 presentations we had at this HOA conference that I facilitated a few weeks ago. So I will note that the people who created the original presentations are the experts, but I've gotten a good understanding of a lot of this information, and I'll try to answer what questions I can after the fact. But we went over an introduction to stormwater ponds, native plants and soil health, and then planning for long-term maintenance. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of stormwater practices or stormwater treatment practices. They do go by a number of different names, which are listed at the top, but like BMPs are best management practices, GSI is green stormwater infrastructure. There's all different acronyms to essentially describe the same type of thing, but the person who presented on some of the long-term maintenance stuff, who does a lot of research with stormwater management at the U of M, likes the term stormwater treatment practices. And these are used to reduce runoff rate, which is how fast the water flows, reduce volume, which is how much flows, and reduce the pollutants that the water picks up and carries to water bodies around. And then native plants are often used in stormwater treatment practices. They have deep root systems that allow them to help infiltrate and take up the water and clean out the pollutants. If you look at the top photo on the very far left, it shows Kentucky bluegrass, which is a common turf species. It is a little hard to see, but you can see all the other plants have roots going really deep, and that's just like a little bit at the top. So that's where native plants are better than regular turf grass for helping infiltrate water and keep it out of the roadways to pick up pollutants. And then with native plants, there's a variety of species adapted to different conditions. So as far as stormwater treatment practices, it'll depend, I guess, on the level of sunlight, but also if you're using native plants, you'll want plants in like a rain garden, which is the bottom image, that are well adapted to moisture and can tolerate large amounts of water. And then with native plants comes soil health. And soil plays an important role in stormwater management as well as having good landscapes and healthy plants. So soil needs to function as a living ecosystem to sustain plants, animals, and humans by infiltrating water, sustaining plant life. And then there's minerals and microbes within the soil that help remove pollutants and cycle nutrients. As you can see on these photos, there's an image of healthy soil versus degraded soil. With the healthy soil, there's space between for the water to get through, and so that helps slow water. And then there's more organic matter and less like sand on the top. So it helps promote healthier plant life as well as stormwater infiltration. And soil health is also important for reducing irrigation and fertilizer needs, and then less erosion and structural issues, and happier plants. So stormwater ponds are one very common type of stormwater practice found in homeowners associations, as well as throughout cities. A lot of the ponds you see are actually constructed ponds for stormwater collection. But a stormwater pond is essentially any basin that's built for the purpose of capturing and storing stormwater runoff, either temporarily or permanently, to prevent and mitigate water quality issues downstream. They all have similar functions to reduce runoff by storing water and then treating to remove pollutants through settling and vegetation. So there are a couple different types of ponds you might see. Detention or dry ponds are generally just dry areas that are meant to collect water just after a storm or a rain event. So the water will drain through the soil or outlet structures. That's the top photo there. It's basically a grassy basin with structures that'll release and collect water when they reach a certain level. And then water will also infiltrate into the ground. And then wet ponds or retention ponds, they do collect water during rain events as well, and then they also stay full after the water drains out. So the water levels will increase slightly with a rain event, but all the water above a certain level will essentially flow out and through like an outlet to downstream areas. But while the water's in the pond, the pollutants and nutrients that cause problems to our water bodies kind of settle out to the bottom of the pond. And then there's biological processes as well. And an infiltration basin is kind of similar to a dry pond, where it's a grassy basin generally that'll collect water during rain events, and then they should drain within 48 hours through the soil. The difference between that and a dry pond is that a dry pond has an outlet structure to kind of help release some of the water, while infiltration basins primarily let the water soak into the ground. So you might be wondering what you can do. So if privately owned, so if the pond is within your HOA, the maintenance responsibility is most likely the HOA's responsibility. And a lot of HOAs don't necessarily know that or know how to address that. And sometimes there might be a maintenance agreement in place with like a city or outside group, but in general, it'll be your responsibility. So a couple things you can do, and some of these you can do yourself, some of these might require a professional, but inspections are important of all different types of infrastructure. It's kind of, you could do a quick, simple visual inspection to assess the need for maintenance. One of our presenters at the conference mentioned you can just basically look at it when you go for a walk and see if things look bad or like they need repair. You want to focus on how it works. So is it functioning as it should? If you have like an infiltration basin or a rain garden, which aren't supposed to hold water for over like 48 hours, but they're continuing to hold water, then that's a sign of a problem. And then watching for critical failures. So that could be like erosion of a stormwater pond or clogging of like outlet structures so water isn't going out, and anything that looks unusual is worth noting. And then maintenance activities are those that essentially ensure proper function and extend the usable life of the practice. So one resource provided from the U of M's stormwater laboratory is some inspection checklists. These are online at that URL there. You can download these for free. They're kind of just things to look for with these different types of practices. I have a list here of some of the common practices, but you'll see like dry ponds, wet ponds, bioretention practices are rain gardens, and then there's a variety of other practices that you might have in your community that you could download an inspection checklist for. And these are intended as a resource, so you can edit them, copy them, amend them as needed to meet your practices. So, for example, for a stormwater pond inspection, they should be done at least once every 5 years, ideally. Yearly is great. You'll want to check inlets and outlets for buildup of sediment, trash, debris, vegetation that's taking over, and then any evidence of illicit discharge, so that's anything besides stormwater. I was recently at a presentation where they mentioned, I think, paint getting into the water, so that would be an illicit discharge. We want to avoid those types of things. And yeah, some examples of illicit discharge would be like oil, odor, floating objects, excessive organic matter. And then you'll want to check the bottom of the pond for kind of the depth or accumulated sediment. As these ponds exist over years, they pick up more and more sediment, and they'll eventually reach capacity, which usually is about 20 to 25 years, but it very much depends on the size of the pond and the size of the area that they're picking up water from. There are people who can do these surveys to determine the pond depth, so that's not necessarily something you need to go into your pond and measure that. There are professionals who can do that, but a maintenance activity would be to dredge the pond of that accumulated sediment when it fills up. And then you'll also want to check your banks for like erosion, scour, and exotic vegetation. So as you can see on that bottom photo, you can kind of see the dirt like all the way around the pond. That's an example of erosion where ideally you'd want that to be covered in grass to kind of help hold the soil in place so it's not falling into the water. So with the stormwater ponds, after you inspect them, that's when you would kind of assess the maintenance needs. So with inlets and outlets, you'll want to clean those out, make sure they're doing as they're supposed to. You want to plant plants along eroded soil banks to help stabilize the soil. You want to get ponds dredged when they're at capacity so they can continue to perform as intended. And then with native vegetation and vegetation in general, you want to remove invasive plants, aggressive plants, woody vegetation near structures that can help, or that might like block the inlets and outlets. Ideally, you want to remove stuff when it's small and easier to get out versus when it's large and overgrown. And then replanting as needed, and then adding low maintenance plants, which native plants are generally lower maintenance than non-native plants, as they kind of don't need as much water, they have deeper soil, they're more adapted to the conditions, so they don't need as much like outside care. And with that, vegetative maintenance in the first year, so if you plant like a rain garden, for example, to help filter stormwater, you typically want to give the native plants like an inch of water a week for new plantings or replacement plantings, and that does include rainwater. So if it rains, you don't necessarily need to water them as much. And then you want to be weeding in the beginning to make sure you're getting weeds out as the plants grow and fill in, but over time as they get bigger, they'll help take up more space and there should be less weeds. But on an annual basis, you'll want to maintain about 3 inches of mulch if you have mulch. Not all rain gardens have mulch. In the spring, you'd want to remove dead material. We always recommend leaving it over the winter because some animals such as bees and other pollinators like make that their home during the winter. So if you cut it out in the fall, that kind of takes away their habitat. And then you can remove and replace plants that aren't thriving, and also removing sediment and cleaning out inlets to ensure things are functioning as properly. And then with invasive species, they are a fairly common problem. I know a lot of HOAs see invasive species as well. Those can be controlled via mechanical, biological, or chemical methods. So kind of some of that is like pulling by hand using chemicals. I would recommend talking to a professional about how to best do that. It'll depend on the species you have, how big of an area it's in, and I guess what your intentions with the area are. So as far as maintenance goes, most maintenance activities are fairly simple. They would occur less than once per year, such as inspection and kind of checking your plants. And yeah, they're primarily simple. They only occasionally require a stormwater professional, and that's more for the larger issues. And that's primarily to remove sediments, litter, trash, and to manage the vegetation. There's typically not a lot of huge structural issues, at least on a regular basis. But maintenance costs can be significant, and this is where I think a lot of HOAs have struggled with budgeting for this type of stuff. So I'm not an expert on the costs, and these numbers came from one of our other presenters, but typically the inspection plus maintenance cost equals the construction cost after a certain number of years, kind of depending on the initial cost of the practice. So like the inspection and maintenance cost would equal the construction cost after 5 years for like a $1,500 installation. So that's kind of more of a rain garden level type practice, where if you go down to like 25 years for a $150,000 installation, that's more of a large stormwater pond where after 25 years, so the yearly maintenance might not be bad, but once you get to like that 25th year and you have to dredge your pond, that is a big ticket item that you want to make sure you're kind of preparing for in advance. But you can save money with self-inspections and completing easy maintenance yourself. And the University of Minnesota does offer a erosion and stormwater management certification program, which is kind of more so for cities at this point, but they have been talking about perhaps developing a program primarily for HOAs, and this is something you could look into if someone on your HOA wants to be certified to do this type of stuff rather than having to hire someone else. And I guess getting your members involved can help save money too. There might be people who really like planting and native plants and want to maintain the gardens, and that is one way to save money. And then setting aside funds for yearly maintenance will prepare your HOA for large ticket items like pond dredging. And so essentially I would recommend setting up a budget for this type of thing if you don't have it already. And so another portion of this project I've been working on is creating educational resources based on the feedback from our survey and focus group. So I have put together this HOA Stormwater Toolkit, which is a fact sheet package with a number of different topics. I did actually print some of these out if you want one after the fact, but we also have these on our Stormwater Tools page. This is all housed on the Minnesota-Washington Conservation District website, but they are applicable to essentially statewide, even like region-wide. And then we also did create some rain garden maintenance videos, which are also found on that website. But I also collected a number of resources that I kind of helped use to develop these fact sheet packages and could be helpful for you for more information. So I would highly encourage you to check out this webpage for resources. And then I just wanted to mention that the Washington Conservation District offers site visits, and there are grant opportunities through local watershed districts. So the Conservation District is located in Oakdale, where we are now, and we do site visits all throughout Washington County. If you're not in Washington County, you could check with your local Soil and Water Conservation District, and they might do something similar. But I would also recommend looking at your local watershed district, which there are different maps and ways online to find out which one you're in if you're not aware, but a lot of them offer cost share programs and grants to help cover the cost of stormwater practices. Like rain gardens are a good example, but they help with other things as well. And you could also look into loans to legumes if you haven't heard of that program, but they offer reimbursement plant grants for helping develop native plantings, which can help, like if you use native plants in a rain garden or just in general as like a buffer around your wetland too. I know some people have done things like that. So I think the Application is closed for that for the next session, but something to keep in mind in the future.